Preserving good health is, of course, a primary need in any historical period, at any time and at any age. And the question here, it's not even about the banal and well-known truth that illness is, to put it mildly, an extremely uncomfortable and unpleasant condition, but rather the fact that the healing process itself often turns out to be very burdensome, and let's face it, not the most pleasant experience. This applies not only to painful and sometimes humiliating medical procedures, but also, in most cases, to very tangible financial costs that hit the budget. And sometimes they can turn into a real disaster for family finances. Fortunately, in our 21st century, medicine has made a colossal leap, offering humanity treatment methods that are much more humane, gentle, and, above all, effective than those our ancestors had in past centuries. One only has to think for a moment, literally for a moment, about the presence of such a blessing of civilization as anesthesia, painkillers, antiviral agents, and of course various medications that help put in order such a delicate system as our digestive tract, to truly appreciate and with great gratitude the fact that we have been fortunate enough to be born into a modern, progressive, and not to mention humane world. For some reason, in public consciousness and historical memory, the opposite of modern comforts and in general, everything advanced, is considered to be the dark Middle Ages. There is an opinion that precisely in this period of history, shrouded in darkness and prejudice, everything was especially hopeless and terrible. People died very young before reaching adulthood. And the medical treatment methods were not only ineffective or useless, but truly wild, cruel, and sometimes simply inhumane. However, if one looks more closely, leaving aside prejudices and stereotypes, it becomes clear that the situation was not much better even in modern times. Not at all in the ancient world, which we are accustomed to speaking about with undisguised enthusiasm. Imagine, for example, that you, by chance or by some unimaginable twist of fate, are living in ancient Greece, the cradle of Western civilization. And of course, as often happens in life, at the most inconvenient moment, an ailment strikes you. What kind of ailment? A simple illness. As was said in those times, accurate diagnoses had unfortunately not yet been made, and therefore one could only speculate about the causes of the ailment. But all the inhabitants of ancient Greece knew very well that they could go to be treated at the so-called Asklepios. What is this mysterious place? A prototype of modern hospitals where highly qualified doctors work. At all. Not at all. The Asklepios were, in fact, sanctuaries or temples dedicated to the legendary healer and physician Asclepius, whom the Greeks honored as the god of medicine. There were no doctors in the modern sense of the word. The treatment procedure was quite simple and uncomplicated. The patient simply had to fall asleep within the walls of the temple. If you were lucky and the gods were merciful, the very Asklepios would appear to you in dreams, and as if by magic, he would cure you of all your misfortunes. But if unfortunately you weren't lucky, there was nothing to be done. You could only rely on the favor of the gods. And around these Asklepios, like bees around honey, or, if you prefer, flies, around something very foul-smelling, countless witches, charlatans, and other self-taught healers gathered, willing to heal you for a certain and sometimes considerable reward. Of course, they didn't give guarantees or promise 100% recovery, but they were willing to heal you, as they often said. Their highly dubious treatment methods were a jarring, dangerous, and sometimes potentially deadly mix of magic, conspiracies of all kinds, herbal medicine, aromatherapy, and blatant, unconfessable deceptions. In fact, in those distant and gullible times, people often relied not so much on the recommendations of these dubious healers, but on their own dreams, believing naively and piously that it was in a dream where they could discover an effective and truly effective remedy for their painful ailment. Unfortunately, we do not know exactly what Aristides suffered from, but it is known with absolute certainty, surely this inhabitant of the ancient world dreamed of the need to undergo nothing less than a honey enema. Yes, you didn't realize it, it was honey. By the way, that night he slept in the Asclepion, which is so strange and, to put it mildly, quite absurd. The advice came directly from the very Asklepios himself. We can only wait and believe that such a, to put it mildly, unorthodox and dubious procedure. It really contributed to Aristides' recovery and helped him return to a full life, but we strongly recommend not to repeat such a thing, at least without consulting a specialist first. Another form of treatment, very peculiar and frankly quite creepy. It involved having a sick person licked by animals. It was especially appreciated that a sick person, weakened by illness, be licked by dogs, as well as by snakes, which, as is well known, are not distinguished by any special affection or tenderness. And now, let's mentally transport ourselves for a moment to ancient Egypt and imagine that you live in this country, majestic and mysterious, and you're tormented by an unbearable and debilitating headache. What should one do in such a case? Adopt the tried and tested method. Just tie a clay crocodile to your suffering head, and that's it. You can now sit back and wait for the miracle to happen. There's a more annoying and labor-intensive recipe. You need to pick the skull of a catfish, which, in case anyone doesn't know, is the most ordinary catfish. Shred it, fry it in oil, and rub this truly hellish mixture on it, on your suffering head. The Egyptians, in general, to their credit, approached treatment in a very unconventional way, but at the same time, from their point of view, very rational and logical. They tried to understand what exactly malicious and insidious demon had penetrated into your body and caused this terrible and painful disease, and then, based on the type of demon and its habits, they used special and very intricate spells that they hoped would be able to drive away the demon and restore health to the person. That is to say, even in those distant times, there was a clear and, more importantly, reasonable cause and effect relationship from their perspective, understanding that not all illnesses are the same and that specific means are needed to tackle each illness. In particular, archaeologists, in their meticulous excavations, often find surgical instruments from the ancient world, as well as some prosthetics intended to replace limbs lost in battle or due to accidents. But the most unfortunate thing is that we don't have reliable statistics that would give us an idea of how many people might have survived these extremely painful medical manipulations, performed on living individuals, fully conscious and with minimal use of anesthetic drugs. In ancient Rome, unlike in ancient Greece and Egypt, the situation of medicine began to change for the better, and in a very notable way. There, a scientific and truly rational understanding began to take shape of the processes that occurred in the human body. There emerged a narrow specialization among medical workers, as well as state regulation of certain aspects of the treatment of the population. Cities had already realized the simple yet important truth that it was better to bury people who died from contagious diseases far from their places of residence to avoid the spread of infections and the contamination of healthy people. It was then that the concept of a healthy lifestyle emerged. The importance of clean, fresh air for the health of the entire body was understood. That's why, in Rome, the houses of the rich and wealthy were built on the hills, where the air was cleaner, while the poor, unfortunately, were forced to crowd into the lowlands, where the air was hazy and not fit for normal activity. It was also considered a sign of wealth, having a slave who could provide first aid and even organize treatment at the level of a modern general or family doctor. But, of course, all these advantages were only available in large, wealthy cities. Far from civilization, in small villages and hamlets, people could only rely on the vigilance of their own health, and in a strong and resilient immune system. Naturally, the development of medicine as a science was through trial and, unfortunately, with many mistakes. And if too many people are dying as a result of their medicine, then, obviously, Something in their approach needs to be radically reconsidered and urgently adjusted, right? The history of medicine, as we all know, is far from over. Probably someday, in the future, distant, our modern treatment methods, which we consider so perfect, will be remembered with chills and horror.